welcome to another edition of Radical Grace Radio.
I'm Pastor Gary Held.
My name's Matthew Pancake, and this is episode 808. It's a program that challenges you to think with the mind of Christ, and one that hopefully puts the gospel in your ears in a world where you might spend the majority of your time with the law in your ears.
I shouldn't laugh. That's not funny, but
It's not funny,
you're absolutely
but it's
right.
Yeah, the reason that things are usually funny is because it's true. That's the sad part about all of this. Just think about it to yourself. If you're out there listening, how many times do you hear all the time about how things ought to be? And an ought is kind of what most of God's law is. Things ought to be this way. You ought to be this way. And that crushes you by itself. It's just like, you can't live up to the world standards. Your closest knit group, sometimes it's hard to live up to those standards. You can't live up to your own standards. Then there's God's standards that you can't live up to. You wish that you could. You make promises that you will. People desire you to make promises that you will. You don't
Sometimes
ever hear
you actually
the good news.
You even put some real effort into trying, but here's the guarantee. Nobody will ever tell you it was enough.
Yeah. And we're not even saying that it's not a good idea to try. It's just, it will crush you, and it doesn't actually save you. If you think that it's saving you, if you think that living up to any given standard is salvific, it's like, well, it's been revealed to us that that's not how it's going to work. And if it were going to work, I've always liked this formula. If it were, then Moses would have been enough, and Jesus died in vain.
Yeah. Well, we already had the law,
Right.
If it's as simple as here's the law, here are the commandments, just do them. Okay. Well,
how's that working out for you?
That. Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, and speaking of working out, that's the little banner that we do at the beginning. You have to admit, I'm just like self-aware of the whole process of doing podcasts, and because I've seen so many of them, I've watched video podcasts, listened to podcasts, and I can hear them hitting the marks. So we just hit a mark. We did our opening banner, and now we're getting ready to go to the Christian News Roll. Now, the thing about the Christian News Roll is there's some surprise news in there.
Yeah.
So I guess what we're going to wind up doing is showing you what that surprise is. So here's the Christian News Roll for this week. So Asbury College in Kentucky, they, in case you didn't notice, they hosted a church service that began on February 8th, that included a gospel choir. And then after that service, students stayed behind, and the gathering gained attention on social media. Videos showed people, swaying to the worship music, and it just kept going on, and they were weeping and they were repenting of their sins. That's how it looks anyway. The event has attracted thousands of people to the school and has occurred nonstop for nearly 2 weeks. Other locations have been pressed into service to accommodate the overflow crowds, including a smaller auditorium and a nearby church, and people have traveled from neighboring colleges and states to attend the event. The gathering has been transformative for many, with people feeling a deep connection to God and one another. Asbury College officials, on the other hand, though, have welcomed the crowds and have worked tirelessly to ensure that everyone can attend safely and comfortably. But the college said that the event is to end today, Thursday the 23rd. But when you click on the announcement at their website, you get 404 file not found. So it may or may not end today.
I
It's
wonder
to
about
be
that.
like the storm on Jupiter. It just never goes away.
Oh, okay. Well, the number 4 story: following the train derailment in East Palestine, Ohio. So this is Ohio, and the one that was train carrying hazardous materials, including vinyl chloride, which is nasty stuff. Residents are experiencing health problems such as skin, eye, and throat irritation. Local residents and officials have raised concerns about the quality of water. The Environmental Protection Agency, that's the EPA, has ordered Norfolk Southern, the railroad company responsible for the accident, to take responsibility for the cleanup. The EPA Administrator, Michael Reagan, has announced that Norfolk Southern will pay for cleaning up the mess and the trauma inflicted upon the community, and the EPA is closely monitoring the situation. Norfolk Southern has already started removing contaminated soil and water, and the company has also pledged to do whatever it takes to make things right with the community, including putting $1 million in a recovery fund for the residents.
Okay, so now the first of two stories about the Southern Baptist Convention is the SBC's Abuse Reform Implementation Task Force. Whew, that's not a corporate name at all. Has launched a new website called Faith-Based Solutions, created and maintained by Guidepost Solutions, the new faith-based division. The website will provide a database of pastors and church leaders who have been credibly accused of sexual abuse, as identified by Guidepost Solutions' investigation into the SBC's handling of sexual abuse cases. Despite some concerns about legal liability, Guidepost, if you remember, found that the executive committee had actually already been maintaining a secret list of sexual offenders in the church. The website is part of the SBC's commitment to implementing reforms and policies to address the issue of sexual abuse within the organization.
Then here's the second of the
here's some
stories.
Surprise news.
The number two stories. Now, this shouldn't surprise everybody. Southern Baptists oust Saddleback Church, right? The Southern Baptist Convention has voted to expel Saddleback Church, one of the largest congregations in the organization, due to its having a female pastor. The SBC's executive committee cited Saddleback's having a female teaching pastor functioning in the office of pastor, and that's an allusion to Stacy Wood, wife of the current lead pastor of Saddleback, Andy Wood. The controversy began in 2021 when Rick Warren, founder of Saddleback, ordained 3 women as pastors, prompting discussions within the denominations about possibly expelling the mega church over this controversy. And while each congregation is self-governing in the SBC, the main enforcement mechanism is to oust it from membership. So the SBC has in recent years authorized the ouster of churches that don't conform to its statement of faith. That's a published statement, including churches with women pastors, LGBTQ inclusive churches, and policies, any support for racism, or failure to respond adequately to child abuse, such as employing sex offenders, as pastors.
Okay, so
there's some good with the bad, I guess. I don't know.
And now comes, well, I didn't feel like I could leave this out, and I didn't necessarily put it in the number one spot because I thought that it belonged there. However, the president of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, LCMS, Matthew Harrison, has called for the excommunication of unrepentant members holding white supremacist views in the church. Full stop. In the letter, Harrison condemned the existence of white supremacist factions within the church, and he said that it had caused local disruption in congregations and subjected LCMS members and deaconesses to online threats. The call came in response to a recent article published by the anti-fascist group Machahara Action, alleging the rise of white supremacist faction within the Lutheran faith. The post singled out Corey Mahler. I've seen him pop up on news. People were talking about it recently. And he has reportedly been active in far-right circles for years and has posted about whiteness and white genocide on Twitter. Harrison also called for those promoting hateful ideologies to repent or face excommunication. The issue has been linked to the recent controversy over the new edition of Luther's Large Catechism, stoking responses throughout the denomination. Some vying for the denomination's leaders have called on Harrison to investigate the allegations regarding the LCMS and white nationalists. And that is this week's Christian News Roll. And to me, that sort of came out of the blue because I'm just not, first of all, I'm not used to the LCMS making any ink at all. When I mentioned it to you, you went, oh, making ink
Well,
is usually bad.
well, historically, I think more often when we've made ink as a church body, it hasn't been flattering. Now this time, well, this is a mixed bag.
Right.
There's a lot of things here that if the listener doesn't know what this is all about, there are folks that others are alleging these are white supremacists. I don't know whether they identify that way, but they are
I don't know much about
identifying
them.
as Lutheran Church Missouri Synod church members, and they are espousing views that sound like they could be inspired by white supremacist ideas. Okay, this is one of these things where what do you do? Because I don't care what Harrison says or what he investigates, whether he should be able to do this or not. The fact is that our church body's polity would not allow him to come into a congregation, a member congregation, and say this person is now excommunicated. Nor can he order the pastor and the congregation, because it's really not the pastor. It's not the pastor that excommunicates. Not technically, it's the pastor with the congregation. It's a congregational move, and it's done for the sake of hopefully winning a brother back. So it's not simply a kind of like purge the ranks, or we're going to be purified, or let's punish these people. Those are all very much old man reactions, but the new man would want to win back a brother. So that's one of the tools in the toolbox. When you need to use it, you can use excommunication, but not at the synodical. I mean, at the national level, he has no authority to do this. So the most he could do is express a intense insistence that should be the way to handle it in a particular congregation. If he says, "Oh, I can see the evidence. I don't know why you can't. So this is how it responsibly should be handled." And if you don't, speaking about oustering, they can tell a congregation member that is a congregation that is part of the Missouri Synod, we expect you to comply, or you're not going to be a part of the LCMS anymore. That's sort of like that's sort of like the only thing they've got. But that's not how you want to usually handle things. I mean, I understand the old saying, when all you have in your toolbox is a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Well, in this case, a sledgehammer.
Yeah. So all you have is this sledgehammer, and everything looks like it's a problem you can pound out somehow.
Well, that's what you hope anyway, right?
Well, I don't know. I don't call me pessimistic that that's going to work. I don't really know that we have a problem broadly. Certainly not broadly. It would be in a few places. It'd be a few individuals really, because I've never. Well, for instance, I mean, I don't know a lot of pastors in the Missouri Synod, but I know relatively a number of folks, and I've never run into one of our guys that I thought was a white supremacist. I've seen some guys who are pretty hard-headed, and I thought they were really wrong about a number of things, but not about race. So
yeah, they said that what it is this has been an online disturbance, is the way they put it, because I know that you've heard recently about people who receive death threats in emails and on social media and what else. So that's part of what's been going on. I looked a little bit at this Mahler's Twitter feed, and he is someone who knows social media the same way Donald Trump does. So look, this is me putting the best construction. Okay. So he knows how to get attention. Mm-hmm. He knows what buttons to press, and he's got followers who are willing to push those buttons right along with him. Maybe some of the followers are doing like everybody else does online, and there's no there's no consequences for sending an anonymous death threat to someone. So they do it. They have no problem doing it. But if the fact is that they're going after deaconesses, I mean,
Yeah,
how long have deaconesses been a thing? For quite a while. So if they're so reactionary that they want the office of deaconess to be gone, I don't know. There's a good portion of the LCMS that's not on board with that. I don't know. It becomes almost like a game for some of these people that are online. And online sort of becomes their world, and this world out here doesn't really matter to them.
One aspect that I sort of know about this in context of there's an ongoing discussion, and some people are very concerned about it, about a edition of Luther's large catechism, not the small catechism that we give to our young people. And adults have it too, but we'll take them through, especially as they want to reach an age where they're going to start becoming active in the church as adult members, and for those adults who are coming in perhaps from other church traditions, we want them to be well grounded in the small catechism. It's briefer, but the large catechism is also valuable, especially it's historically been mostly valuable to pastors, but certainly other people could benefit from it too. So they were going to publish a new edition with some supporting materials, and it passed doctrinal review, and people generally signed off on it, the people who were responsible for the project and overseeing it. And then the uproar started when people argued based on some of the things that they were reading in the advanced materials. I guess they got advanced materials that
they had been distributing it, and then they halted distribution.
It didn't get distributed to me, I'll say that.
I haven't seen it either.
So the idea is that there was questions about, were they being correct enough or precise enough? Were they letting certain trends, contemporary trends, and things that are frankly, people use these like dog whistles. They talk about critical race theory, even though they haven't got a clue what that actually is. They just know what they've been told about it, and they say, well, that's crept into some of the things that are published here. I wouldn't know because I can't get it. I don't have my hands on a copy, so I don't know what it's about.
Yeah.
But I think that the folks that are reacting that way, they probably are people that they should be watched. You should be paying attention to what they publish, what they go out and say. But I guess I just don't think that it's a widespread problem. That's, I don't know. Now, in our case, they could make a church comply with these directives, but they would have to be willing to, boot them out of the LCMS, much like the Southern Baptists booted out one of the largest congregations they've ever had, the Saddleback Church.
Well, I figured that would be an easy segue, right?
I know I'm not a big fan of the Saddleback Church, but I mean, okay, it is what it is.
See, my thing about all of that is I wonder if, how many people are actually going to notice.
What do you mean?
In the congregations, or however many people that actually go there, and the people that run the place. Do they really? I mean, are they really going to notice? They're going to be sort of like, oh, we got kicked out. When did that happen? Because
I don't know. I think that the question really is whether the support that Saddleback has historically made available to their broader church body. I'm sure that they also are supporters financially, of the convention, the organization, and maybe they will be sorely missed. I don't know, but how much that influence flows the other way, I don't know. I mean, can can they still recruit a pastor if they needed to? It's so different from the church body I'm in that I'm going to hazard a guess and say, yeah, they still could.
Yeah, I'm sure they could.
They can do a whole lot of whatever they want.
I mean,
within reason.
They have schools that, are Baptist schools where, Bible colleges that people can go to. But I don't know that that's a necessity like it is in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. You have to go to the seminary, has to be 4 years, vicarage, stuff like that.
Well, I mean, that's even in the Missouri Synod, that's not the only track that leads to ordination.
But it's kind of clear that you're kind of expected to do that. That's not the way it's worked in the Southern Baptist Convention. Because when I grew up, it was usually if there was a pastor leaving, like say he's retiring, somebody in the congregation went to the local Bible college, and then the congregation said, "You're it." It wasn't a matter of, they called someone from Synod or something like that.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that may be how most smaller Baptist churches, are organized or what they're set up to do. I suspect a lot of them recruit. Well, like this Wood, he was already a pastor at apparently outwardly successful church, and that's why the Saddleback folks decided, hey, he would be a good guy to get on board. So they've got a method. I don't know that their convention can exactly interfere with the method that they have for getting a new pastor if they need one.
They definitely were not able to interfere when Rick Warren, Pastor Rick Warren, ordained 3 females to be pastors. They weren't able to interfere with that. So, I guess if they were desperate for a pastor all of a sudden, they could call one of them.
The listeners should understand that we are not advocating that you should have female pastors because that's a good idea. Definitely not saying that. That is not something that is ongoing in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. We don't have ordained female pastors. Let's not rehash the whole issue wise. Just to say that nobody on this show is advocating for a change for us. We're not saying that it's a neutral thing. What we are saying, at least what this guy is saying, is that I'm going to mind my own knitting. They somebody else wants to do something different in their church. I don't have a say about it, and I don't want to really express too much of an opinion about what other people are doing on their Sunday mornings.
Well, maybe they have a website that they can look up doctrinal issues for various congregations.
Oh, maybe. I don't know.
You could do that. I mean, no, they only have the one apparently where you can look for, whether or not your pastor is, on the up and up as far as like, handling abuse cases or abuse allegations, or maybe himself.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah, that's a pretty big deal. The whole issues of abuse. They got to get it. Boy, they got to get, well, it's too late to get ahead of that. So, I mean, they want to get ahead of that. They
try and make it look better.
What they've got to do is play a game of catch up to figure out, okay, in light of the fact that we didn't do probably enough before, how are we going to react now? So there you go. I pray to God. No, this is not just an expression. That's serious. That leadership in my church body sees this kind of thing and says, okay, we saw what happened to these church leaders when they were trying to do something in a corner instead of being transparent. Yeah. Oh Lord, don't let that happen to us.
Yeah.
Like if you know something and don't say something, it's gonna come back and it's gonna be something on all of us, and we're all gonna suffer.
You hope that they would be as zealous as they are about white supremacy.
Well, yeah, right. I just hope there's no secret lists, because that's not how we roll. So,
well, it's not supposed to be. No. Okay, so I don't know about, the EPA's finally involved in what went on in Ohio. We haven't been covering it on here because, it is what it is. I mean, if the government can't figure out what to do with a disaster by now, or if they're just getting worse at it, I'm not sure I'd have any opinion of something that would help. I mean, 2 weeks.
My only thought was that putting $1 million in a recovery fund for residents, maybe. I mean, that sounds like that's getting off kind of cheap.
Yeah.
I'm serious. $1 million.
I'm not kidding either.
That sounds like a lot of money, but it's a lot of money for you. It's a lot of money for me. It's a lot of money for most people in most situations. But if you got an environmental disaster,
which is what it is,
that probably is just going to get you started. Like, okay, 1 million to begin with, that's for openers, and we'll see where it goes from there.
It's a good start. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, how many millions did they spend to shoot down Chinese balloons?
I don't know, but it's a different different government agency. So
is that what it is? Oh, okay.
That's what it is. That's what it is.
But I am interested in, are they actually right now winding down the Asbury College Revival? Is that winding down today? Or is it, I can imagine somebody saying that, well, it was an act of God. Suddenly the announcement that it was going to end today it just won't come up on the website. So people can't see, I don't know. Maybe the reality is like somebody realized that there might be a benefit to keep it going for a little bit longer, at the college.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I barely know about how. I know they've been talking about this. It's been buzzing, but I don't know very many of the actual facts of the matter. The school administration, you're right. They'd have some motives for perhaps wanting it to go on. I'm sure there's other things that would make it not, like, for instance, if it's drawing a lot of folks to your campus who aren't students there, don't belong there. They're just there to see what's going on, and they want to be part of a big thing. Okay, but
right.
You kind of have to. Well, you just can't. Most times, you just can't go walking around doing anything you want on certainly on most private college campuses.
Mm-hmm.
It just, state campuses, even then they have some restrictions on, people who, they're not students, they're not faculty, they're not staff. What are you doing here? Explain yourself. Now, if you can usually argue, if you have a good reason for that, but just to say, well, it's such a cool thing. I just wanted to be here. And the university might have thought, or the college might have thought, yeah, this was really kind of cool for the first week, maybe week and a half, but
the storm's wearing thin now.
Y'all are just hanging around. It's just like, well.
Oh no! Right. Apparently, they're still doing what they've been doing the entire time. Yeah. They're just all wound up about it. And well, okay, but at some point it's got to end.
The only one thing I heard about it was that somebody's social media post, that was trying to tell people, don't go to this revival or this so-called revival. I don't have an opinion about whether it is a real revival or not a real revival. I'm not sure what the criteria would be for what does it take to become a real revival. I suppose you'd have to be able to say with definitiveness that this is of God. That might be good opener, but I heard the person saying, or read again on social media, that somebody was saying, don't go to this. What you should do if you want to really experience the Spirit of God is go to your faithful pastor, and receive the gifts of God in word and sacraments. Again, that's where the Holy Spirit is going to be. And he's not wrong. He's not wrong. I mean, if you want to experience a real movement of God in your life, you don't have to go to Kentucky to do it.
Right. So you don't have to go travel 1 million miles just to do that.
I would give the attribution to who wrote that if I knew, but I saw it maybe a week ago or something like that, and I didn't pay attention. So
So,
if you're out there, sorry.
What kind of revival is going to happen on the other side of the break, Pastor?
Well, what we're going to do is we're going to go over some ground that that people are familiar with. I think they know the story of Jesus being, after his baptism, being led by the Spirit, or in case of Mark's gospel, being driven by the Spirit out into the wilderness, and his temptation experiences out there. And the first Sunday in Lent, that's a reading that comes up. So I thought what we would do is talk about it, because there might be something there that was there all along, but we weren't looking for it, so it didn't register with us. That's the idea.
Okay, so with that, stick with us and we'll be back with more Radical Grace Radio in just a moment. Welcome back to Radical Grace Radio. I've heard over the years, lots of people interpret, Jesus in the wilderness, being tempted. I've heard lots of different things said about it, lots of different, spins, I guess is the way you could put it. But I've always had the suspicion that there was more going on there than just there's the evangelical way of looking at it, and there's the typical Lutheran way of looking at it. But, back in the beginning, you and I talked a lot about various things in the New Testament. And one of them, whenever I first came to Risen Savior Lutheran Church, one of them wasn't this. I'm actually kind of interested what's going to happen today, because, usually interesting things happen when you start talking about things that people think they know all about.
Right. Well. So, and you know what? It's not just you guys. This happens to pastors all the time, probably more frequently, because we're always having to dive into scriptures, perhaps ones that we're not as familiar with, but even ones that we're very familiar with. And you're preparing for a Bible class or a sermon or something, and you dive in and you go, well, when did they put this in the Bible? This is brand new. What is it really? It's that it's been there the whole time, and you never looked at it. You never saw it, or you never recognized that there was something there beyond the surface. So this happens all the time. It's not like you're not a good reader if you still are discovering new things in familiar passages all over the place. So we're going to look at something that comes up in Lent. In fact, it comes up this first Sunday in Lent, and that is the way that Jesus was tempted in the wilderness. This is part of his suffering, because this is what he's going to willingly undergo to be fully human and to be able to provide for us a complete redemption, every aspect of us that is redeemable. And so he has to go through the experience, and that includes this kind of suffering that is temptation, to hold up under temptation. So Mark is the one that does this the briefest. He's simply, after the narration of the baptism of Jesus, he says immediately the Spirit drove him into the wilderness, right? And then in Mark, lots of things are immediately, but he goes into the wilderness, and he was in the wilderness for 40 days, right? And says he was being tempted by Satan, and he was with wild animals, and the angels were ministering to him. Mark doesn't go into what the temptations were. More people are familiar, I think, with the version, either probably in Matthew or Luke, where there are 3 different temptations, and you the reader are led to understand that there could have been more than that, but these are the 3 that they want you to focus on. So Why don't we turn, in fact, to Matthew's Gospel, chapter 4. The temptation account, the fuller version of the temptation account, also appears in Luke, although with a difference, that two of the temptations are in other orders. So we're gonna go with Matthew here, because, well, I'm going to show you something that perhaps you already recognize, at least in part, but maybe there's more here. So if you're at Matthew chapter 4 and verse 1, could you go ahead and read that? That's Jesus is tested in the wilderness, and that account goes on to the end of verse 11. So just go ahead and read it.
Starting at the top of the chapter, then
Yes,
Jesus
please.
was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. And after fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. And the tempter came and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread." But he answered, "It is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." Should I go on?
Yeah, please.
Okay. Then the devil took him to the holy city and set him on the pinnacle of the temple and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you, and on their hands they will bear you up, lest you strike your foot against a stone." And Jesus said to him, "Again it is written, you shall not put the Lord your God to the test." And again the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And he said to him, "All these I will give you if you will fall down and worship me." Then Jesus said to him, "Begone, Satan, for it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God, and him only shall you serve." Then the devil left him, and behold, the angels came and were ministering to him.
Okay, very good. So that's the story. Obviously, it's expanded quite a bit from what we saw in Mark, where it simply said that he was tempted by Satan for 40 days. This is going on and describing what some of those experiences were. So what we're going to look for something, and what we're looking for, you hear, preachers, or maybe more likely semprofs, talk about, a hermeneutical key. And what they mean is something that you use to unlock the meaning of something. Hermeneutics is all about trying to understand and get at the meaning. And so, well, it's interpretation. So before we even go into these different temptations, again, I said Matthew and Luke both, and this is not included in John, but Matthew and Luke both have these same three temptations, although not in the same order. And Mark has only that after the baptism, Jesus goes into the wilderness. But they all say something very important. They all make it a point of saying 40 days. He's out there for 40 days, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he's, no, notice, and he's in the wilderness 40 days. Okay, so that should be something that reminds you of, well, what else does that make you think of about 40 something in the wilderness?
Me personally, it makes me think about the Israelites
because
because they were 40 years in the wilderness.
They were 40 years in the wilderness.
Right.
So, and what we're going to see is that sort of is supposed to tip you off that there is something going on here that represents more than just, Jesus shows that he's truly the Son of God because he can withstand all this temptation and he doesn't fail. And this is something that, well, we, the reader, might have guessed that already, that he's going to be fine. But it's important to look at it in this context that the Israelites also were in the wilderness. And for them, it was 40 years. For 40 years, but they were tested, they were tried in the wilderness, but they failed. And so what I mean by failed is that some of the same things, or some things that are analogous to what happened to Jesus, happened to them. they didn't do very well. They did terrible, in fact. Whereas Jesus is showing that, unlike the Israelites before him, he is actually be able to not only withstand temptation, but to live as God's true son. You know, sometimes in the Old Testament scriptures, Israel is suggested to be God's son, a kind of son. But you can see that, as far as fitting the son, Israel as a nation doesn't always do what their father wants them to do. This son succeeds in a way that, well, that Israel didn't. And I think that's going to be important. So the very first temptation in Matthew, let's go back to that. And says in verse 2, the tempter came to him and said to him, if you are the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread, right? Because, well, the temptation is Jesus is hungry, and you can do a lot of things talking about why this would be a very powerful temptation. And I'm not saying that one interpretation explains everything, but this is interesting. Is that it starts off with a temptation about, you want to eat, you could do so. We should do something about your situation. You could make these stones into bread, and then it wouldn't be an issue anymore. And notice up to this point, has Jesus been? Does anything recorded that says, it says Jesus was hungry. He was hungry. Does it say he was complaining about it?
No, basically it says that after 40 days he was hungry. Imagine that.
Well, there you go. But maybe he's simply trusting that God knows what's going on and God will provide for him. So, whereas when the Israelites started off their 40 years in the wilderness, you might say the first temptation that encounters them, or the first thing that they are tried in aspect they're tried in, is they are in Exodus. If you went to Exodus 16, they've already gotten out of Egypt. They've passed through the Red Sea. There's a little bit of rejoicing in the song of Miriam and Moses, and so yay, we're set free. But quickly it becomes something kind of about doubting what God is up to, because it says they set out from Elim, and all the congregation of the people of Israel, this is Exodus 16, and came to the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai. So they're on their way to Sinai, right? On the 15th day of the second month after they had departed from the land of Egypt. All right, now here's where the problem starts. And at verse 2, and the whole congregation of the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. And the people of Israel said to them, would that we have died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the meat pots and ate bread to the full. For you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. They're grumbling. Remember I said that when Jesus was out there 40 days, he's not grumbling. He's not complaining. He doesn't seem to have any doubts about his Father's goodness. But no, they're saying, well, their attitude is, well, gee, if God was all along just going to kill us with starvation, he might as well have killed us back there, back where we came from. Would we have died by his hand in the land of Egypt? So that doesn't sound exactly like they're having much confidence in God taking care of them. No, they're grumbling. They've got a complaint. And boy, they're sure letting Moses and Aaron get an earful. And so, well, you know what? They want to be fed, and they don't know where the food's coming from. And there's no food out there just, for the picking up to be had yet, because they can't see any, but God tells them, and we know what happens next is God basically assures them that that they're going to be able to have bread from heaven. So bread, remember Matthew, it's about turning stones into bread. Well, this is about, which would be a very big miracle. This is about miraculous bread, only this time not from turning stones into the bread, but the bread falling from heaven, coming down, and it's kind of like a frost or something that they can collect later on. That's one of the descriptions of the manna. The manna is bread from heaven. It's going to feed them. It's going to nourish them. And, but they grumbled. They grumbled about this, and they complained. Now God has to demonstrate, no, I'm really your God, and I'm really looking out for you. So, they got, and then on top of that, when they get a little bit tired of just manna, they get some quail too. So it's like, they're always looking at it. The glass for these Israelites is always half empty. It's never half full. They never say, you know what, we're actually doing pretty good. But okay, so that's one temptation. Okay, so 40 and 40, a food issue, and the devil wants to make food in the wilderness into another issue, but Jesus doesn't fall for that. So okay, so there's a little parallel there. Now let's just see if it develops farther. And so, well, what happens after this episode? Well, it says in chapter 17, the whole community set out from the desert of Sin. That's just where the whole manna thing took place, traveling from place to place as the Lord commanded. They camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. So it says in verse 2, they quarreled with Moses and said, give us water to drink. Okay, and then this is more Moses, replying, hey, why do you quarrel with me? And then, very important, why do you quarrel with me? So the quarreling is something that, they're raising an issue. They're getting ugly with him. But then that's not the whole thing. It's not just like he's taking it personally. You might say, Moses, you're taking things awfully personally. The next thing he says is, why do you put the Lord to the test? See, they're testing God. Are you really with us? Will you really provide for us what we need? It's a fancy way of saying, are you faithful in these things? Faithful to what you've promised us. And you've said that we're going to be your people. You're going to be our God. And so are you faithful in that? And they put God to the test. They put him to the test. And, then later on, right now, Moses is instructed to take his staff and strike the rock, and the water is going to come forth. And of course, we know that later on, he does something like that again, and that was not authorized. But this one's authorized in Exodus 17. So he does this thing, and the water comes out, and what he did is he called the place Massa and Meribah. And you say, well, what do those mean? He says, well, Massa means testing, because that's where they tested the Lord. And Meribah means quarrel, because that's where they quarreled with him. And so they were, in fact, it goes on to say, the Israelites quarreled and they tested the Lord, saying, this is what they were saying, is the Lord among us or not? This is kind of like a prove yourself that you're really with us, and that what you've told us isn't just empty promises, right? Okay, now let's go back to Matthew 4, right? Because now we've gotten past the temptation about turning the stones into bread, and and Jesus had said, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. So, he sets it straight right there. But that's not going to dissuade the devil from trying another strategy. So in this case, what the devil does is in verse 5, the devil took him to the holy city, set him on the pinnacle of the temple, and said to him, if you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, right? He wants to show that he's really the Son of God. And this is the rationale. It is written, here's what God promised, he will command his angels concerning you, right? And also that on their hands, I guess this is the angels, the idea, they will bear you up, lest you strike your foot against a stone. So they're trying. He's saying, if that's really true, then you should be able to throw yourself down and prove that God is with you, right? That's good. That's the idea here. And Jesus immediately sees what's going on for real. Jesus said to him again, it is written. He's going to answer him again from Scripture. It is written, you shall not put the Lord your God to the test. It's exactly what the Israelites should have done back when they had the whole episode with the water. They tested the Lord. They said, is the Lord really with us or not? And Satan is trying to get Jesus to do the same thing. Well, is the Lord really with me? Can I really just throw myself down? And then God is good for the promise of not letting me strike my foot against a stone. Well, that would be putting God to the test. That would be trying to determine by proof that, God is really with him. And Jesus says, that's not what you shall not put the Lord your God to the test. You just don't do it. So, all right. So almost done, but we're not done yet. And then in Matthew, the next place, would you read now again? I know you read it before, but read from verse 8 through the end of 10, I guess.
Okay. Again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And he said to him, all these things I will give you, if you will fall down and worship me. Then Jesus said to him, begone, Satan, for it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God, and him only shall you serve.
All right. So in you mentioned before about evangelical churches and Lutheran churches. One of the things that will be most often brought up about this temptation is that, it's the temptation to use and rely on worldly power. Like if you have all the kingdoms of this world and they're going to serve you and you're going to get all the glory from being, a king or more than just a king, because they're going to all be something that you control. That's the temptation. And no, but Jesus doesn't see it that way. I mean, that's part of the temptation. That's the enticement. But what's the real temptation? It's to fall down and worship the devil,
Right.
to worship something that is not God, because you want to have some reassurance that you're going to be fine, that you're going to be in charge, that that things are going to work out.
To have an idol that you can hold in your hand.
Interesting that you say an idol. So then,
oh, really?
well, because do you know what immediately happens after the whole thing with the Israelites and the rock and the water coming out of the rock is that in a few short chapters, they're going to be at Sinai, right? They're going to actually be there. That's where they've been traveling from ever since they left Egypt. They've been on their way to Sinai, because that's the mountain that way back when God was commanding Moses and Moses was relaying these instructions to Pharaoh, that this is where he was supposed to bring the people, and so that they could they could worship God on this mountain. So they're going to come to the mountain. Moses is going to go up there. They wait. He's up there a long time, longer than anybody thought he would be. They start wondering what's really going on, and they need some kind of reassurance. And Moses can't be seen, and you can't see God to begin with. And So they want something that they can see. They want something that they can, that they can relate to, because Egyptians have gods and everybody else has different gods. And so they have Aaron make for them a golden calf. They melt down the earrings and things like that, and they fashion a calf, and with the idea that this idol is supposed to represent the God who brought them up out of Egypt. And that's what they fall down and worship. In other words, they are worshiping something that is not God. And isn't that interesting that that's the exact temptation that Jesus was faced with? Was, you know what? There's a big payoff here, but what you got to do is worship me. And Jesus knows what's up. He's not taken in by this at all. His answer is, for it is written, again, going back to scripture, you shall worship the Lord your God, and him only shall you serve. So only serve the Lord, only worship him. You don't worship as God anyone that is anything or anyone that is not God. And so those three temptations exactly parallel the things that Israel went through. I mean, this seems like it's too much to be a coincidence.
Wait, so the things that Israel went through and failed.
And they failed. That's the whole point, is that they went through and they were not the son that they were supposed to be. They went through, they faced these different trials and they failed. Jesus, who is God's son in a more definitive way for sure, he goes through the same thing, but the difference is that he does not fail. Every place where they fell down, spiritually, morally, whatever you want to say, he doesn't. He makes it through, and he is he's the victor because of it. But he's so much the victor that, the devil up and just left him. He's just like, well, I don't know what to do about this. So he's out of there, because, it all worked before. It didn't work this time. What's up? What's up with that? So I haven't actually decided if this is what I am preaching on this particular Sunday coming up, because there's several good texts for this Sunday. Old Testament epistle lesson is from Romans. Then there's this for the gospel lesson. But it's certainly interesting to bring out that even in things that you thought you knew everything about, there can be something that maybe you just hadn't seen that before. So it's more than just a coincidence, I think.
Well, you see, the thing is like, I've heard bits and pieces of that before, but the part that was missing for me was the part about the failure. I mean, I've heard sort of like people put two and two together here and there, but I hadn't really considered the idea that it was that they failed, and they weren't supposed to. They were supposed to be God's son,
God's chosen people,
and they failed, and therefore
three times, more than three times, but three notable times.
But three that actually point to Christ.
That's exactly
that resonate in such a way as to make you realize that, like what we were talking about at the other side was, at the beginning of the show, turns out to be true for a reason, because we fail and Christ doesn't. Christ didn't and doesn't. Yeah, that's right. Well, with that, the only thing that I can say is preach on that. Okay. That's
You'd like me to. Okay.
And thanks for listening to Radical Grace Radio today, and may God bless you.